cosmos for sleep stories. Tonight we travel out to Saturn around the rings, past Titan and the small icy moons, over the pole, and through everything anybody has ever sent there. Settle in and let your eyes close whenever they are ready. The journey carries on without them. Saturn is the 6th planet from the Sun, and it is the furthest one anybody can reliably find in the sky without help. It sits about 9.5 times further from the Sun than this room does. A little under 1.5 billion kilometers. From a garden here, it is a steady pale yellow point, and it has been in that sky doing exactly this for the whole of recorded history. It is a large planet, and it is not made of ground. Its width is about 9.5 times this planet's, and it holds better than 90 times as much material. And nearly all of that material is hydrogen and helium. There is no surface anywhere on it. The gas grows thicker with depth, and warmer and slower, and at no point does it become a floor. Spread out over its own volume, it is lighter than water. It is the least dense planet there is. Every other planet and every moon would sit lower in a bath than this one would. It turns very quickly for its size. A day there is about 10 hours and 40 minutes. In that time, a band of cloud at the equator travels around 9 times the distance around this whole planet, and the spin has pulled the globe out of round. Saturn is measurably wider across its middle than it is from pole to pole. The year is long. It takes 29.5 of our years to go once around the sun. Somebody here who has seen 3 Saturn years has had a long life. Its seasons run about 7 years each, and its tilt, a little over 26 degrees, is close enough to this planet's that the seasons arrive out there in the same order. The light is thin. Sunlight at Saturn is around 1/100th of what falls on this window. The sun is still by far the brightest thing in that sky, a small hard disk, about 1/10 of the width it has from here. And noon on the cloud tops comes out roughly as bright as a heavily overcast afternoon. Everything about it is far enough away to be slow. A message sent from here takes about an hour and 20 minutes to arrive, and the same again to come back. Every instruction ever sent out, there was written for a situation that had already finished happening by the time it landed. And around all of it, held out flat and turning, there are the rings. The rings are not a solid thing, and they never were. They are made of separate pieces of ice, each one going around the planet on its own path, the way a moon does. Nothing in them is joined to anything else. Nearly all of it is water ice. More than 9 parts in 10 by mass is ordinary frozen water, the same substance as the frost on a window here. The rest is fine dust and traces of rocky material mixed through it in small amounts. The pieces come in every size, and most of them are small. The smallest are grains no bigger than the dust in this room. The commonest are somewhere between a pea and a snowball. The largest are boulders about the size of a house. Anybody standing inside the brightest ring would be standing in a slow, glittering crowd of ice, with rather more room between one piece and the next than you would expect. Across, they are enormous. The main rings run something like 270,000 kilometers from one outer edge to the other, which is about 7/10 of the way from here to the moon. The faint outermost ring, made of dust rather than ice boulders, is wider still by a very large margin, and through their thickness they are almost nothing at all. In most places, the main rings are about 10 meters deep, top to bottom. Nowhere in the main system are they much more than a kilometer. Scaled down until the whole ring's span was a meter across, the sheet would be thousands of times thinner than a sheet of paper, thinner than anything anybody could pick up and hold. There is not very much of them. Gathered into one body, all the ice in the rings would make a single modest moon, something like 300 kilometers across. That is the entire system. A few hundred kilometers of ice spread flat across 250,000. They do not turn as one piece. The inner parts of the bright rings go around in something like 7 hours. The outer parts take about 14. Every ring is overtaking the ring outside it, permanently and gently, and has been for as long as anybody has looked. There are gaps, and the gaps are wide. The largest is nearly 5,000 kilometers from edge to edge, an open lane running the whole way around, plain to see from here through a modest telescope. Narrower divisions run all through the rest of the system, and small moons are usually sitting inside them or just beside them. How old the rings are is an open question. Some measurements suggest they are young by the standards of the solar system, perhaps a few 100 million years. Others put them at the age of the planet itself. Nobody has settled it. The rings lie in the plane of the planet's equator, and the sun is nearly always a little above that plane or a little below it. So the rings throw a shadow onto the planet. It falls as a set of dark bands across the cloud tops, sharp at the edges, bent by the curve of the globe underneath, with the gaps between the rings showing through as bright lines inside the dark. The shadow moves with the seasons, and the whole pattern takes a Saturn year to complete. Twice in each of those years, the sun crosses the ring plane exactly. When it does, the shadow narrows to a single dark line, and then to nothing at all, and the rings themselves, seen edge on, very nearly leave the sky. From here, in a small telescope, they simply go missing for a few months and then come back. Close in, the rings are not smooth. They resolve into thousands of narrow ringlets, one inside the next, like the grooves cut into a record. Some are perfectly circular. Some are slightly off-center. A few are braided around one another, and a few are held in place between pairs of small moons riding just inside and just outside them. There are markings on the widest ring that come and go. They are faint, and they lie across the ring outward rather than around it, and they last for a few hours before fading again. They were first noticed when the rings were photographed from nearby, and they show up mostly in the seasons when the sun is close to the ring plane. In those seasons, the light comes in almost flat. Flat light is the only thing that ever shows the rings having any height. Walls of ice standing up out of the plane, 2 or 3 kilometers tall at the edges of the gaps, and around the moons embedded in them, throw shadows that run for 100 kilometers and more across the ice beside them. For the rest of the Saturn year, those same walls cast nothing whatever. The rings also light the planet. The night side of Saturn is not dark. The rings hang overhead, lit from the far side, and return a soft light back down onto the cloud tops, enough to make out the bands by, and enough to photograph a whole night hemisphere by. And there is one view of the system that exists only from behind it. With the sun on the far side of the planet, the globe goes dark. The rings light up from within, and the dusty parts that are almost invisible in direct light become the bright ones. In one photograph taken that way, out past the edge of the outermost ring, this planet appears as a single pale point with no detail on it at all. Titan is the largest of Saturn's moons, and it is larger than the planet Mercury. It measures about 5,100 kilometers across, which makes it the second largest moon in the solar system. It goes around Saturn once every 16 days, keeping the same face turned inward the whole way round. It has an atmosphere, and that is the unusual part. No other moon anywhere has anything like it. Titan's air is mostly nitrogen, as this planet's air is, and at the ground it presses down about half again, as hard as the air in this room. It is also very cold out there, 179 degrees below zero at the surface, so that air sits dense and thick and slow. From outside, none of the ground shows at all. The whole moon is wrapped in an orange haze, layered and featureless, made of large organic molecules that form high up and drift slowly downward. For nearly 25 years after the first cameras arrived, nobody had seen a single feature on the surface. The maps came later, made by radar and by infrared, both of which pass straight through a haze that ordinary light cannot. What the maps found was a landscape with liquid standing on it. Around the North Pole, there are seas, hundreds of kilometers across, and more than 100 meters deep in places, flat enough to give a clean reflection. The largest of them is bigger than any lake on this planet. They are not water. They are liquid methane and ethane, which at that temperature do what water does here. And the methane moves through the whole landscape. It gathers into cloud, it falls, it collects. It runs down through channels cut into water, ice as hard as rock, and it leaves river valleys that show up plainly on the radar maps. There are dry beds in the tropics that fill only rarely. Nearer the equator, the ground is dark and dry. Long parallel ridges of very fine dark grains run for hundreds of kilometers each, all lined up the same way, wrapping most of the way around the moon. They are dunes made of the same organic matter that settles out of the haze overhead. One machine has landed there. It was carried out from here aboard the orbiter, released, and let down through the haze on parachutes in January of 2005, which is the most distant landing anybody has ever made. It took 2.5 hours to come down, photographing channels the whole way. It settled onto a damp, dark surface, scattered with rounded pebbles of water ice, and it kept sending from the ground for over an hour after it arrived, which was longer than anybody had asked of it. Saturn keeps a great many moons, and most of them are very small. Well over 200 have been counted, and the count is still going up. The great majority are a few kilometers across, on distant, tilted, unhurried orbits. 7 are large enough to have pulled themselves into a ball. Enceladus is 500 kilometers across, and the whitest thing in the solar system. Its surface is clean water ice, and it returns very nearly all the light that lands on it, which leaves it colder than anything else nearby, at 198 degrees below zero. From a distance, it looks like a smooth white pebble. At its south pole, 4 long fractures cross the ice. Out of those fractures, continuously, comes a plume of water, ice grains, and vapor together, rising hundreds of kilometers above the surface before most of it falls quietly back. It has been doing this the whole time anybody has been watching. Underneath the shell, there is a layer of liquid water that goes all the way around the moon. The part of the plume that does not fall back becomes a ring. Saturn's outermost ring is broad and faint and made of very fine ice, and Enceladus is where it comes from. The moon sits inside the ring it is making, going round inside its own trail. Mimas is smaller, and it carries one very large crater. The moon is under 400 kilometers across. The crater is 130, a third of the width of the whole body, with walls 5 kilometers high and a single mountain standing at the center of it, 6 kilometers tall. From the right angle, the crater gives that little moon a face. Iapetus is 2 colors, and the line between them is clean. One hemisphere is as dark as coal, and the other is as bright as fresh snow, and the boundary between them runs neatly around the middle. The dark side is the side that faces forward as the moon travels. It also carries a ridge along its own equator, 13 kilometers high and more than 1,000 long. And it orbits far enough out and tilted enough to be the one large moon that sees the rings from above rather than edge on. Rhea is the second largest and the simplest. It is 1,500 kilometers of old hard water ice, cratered everywhere and essentially unchanged for a very long time. From the hemisphere that faces the planet, Saturn stands fixed in the sky, enormous and pale, with the rings crossing it as a single bright line. None of them is going anywhere. Every one of them has been on the same path around the same planet for far longer than there has been anything here to look at them. And each arrives back where it started on time. Every time there is a shape at Saturn's North Pole that has no equal anywhere else. The cloud tops around the pole are arranged into a hexagon. 6 straight sides and 6 corners closed, regular, and holding its shape year after year. It is not a trick of the light, and not an artifact of any one camera. Every instrument that has ever looked at it has found the same 6 sides. It is very large. The whole figure measures around 30,000 kilometers from corner to corner, and each one of its 6 sides is a little wider than this entire planet. All of it turns slowly, coming back around in a little over 10.5 hours, which is very close to the length of a Saturn day. It has been there for as long as anybody has been able to look. It was first seen in the pictures brought back at the start of the 1980s. It was still there, unchanged in shape, when the next machine arrived 23 years later, and it was still there when that one finished 13 years after that. Nothing in this planet's atmosphere holds a shape like that for a week. At the middle of it, there is a turning eye, a spiral of cloud, a couple of 1,000 kilometers across sits at the exact pole, with a clear center and a wall of taller cloud standing all the way around it. The South Pole has one of its own. Both of them simply stay where they are. The color of the pole changes with the season. Through the northern winter, the inside of the hexagon was a deep blue. As the light came back over about 5 years, it turned gold, and the blue moved south. Nobody has watched a full cycle of this, because the full cycle takes 29.5 years, and the watching only began within living memory. Above both poles, there is light standing up in the air. Curtains of aurora hang over each pole, more than 1,000 kilometers tall, far taller than the ones over this planet's poles, and lit mostly in ultraviolet, in colors no eye here is built to register. They shift over hours, and in some form they are always there. Underneath all of it, the pole itself is simply more cloud. There is no ground under any of this, no coastline, nothing fixed for a shape to be anchored to. The hexagon is a pattern in moving gas that has settled on a shape and kept it over a region wider than several Earths laid side by side for at least 45 years, and in all likelihood a great deal longer than that. Before 1979, nobody had seen Saturn any closer than a telescope on the ground could bring it. The first machine to go past was a small one in September of that year. It crossed the ring plane out beyond the bright rings, found nothing there to trouble it, and showed that the crossing could be made at all. Its pictures were coarse, and they were the first ever taken from nearby. The two that followed were far better equipped. They had left here in the same fortnight of 1977, 16 days apart, and had gone by Jupiter in 1979 on the way out. Saturn was the second stop for both of them, and for one of them, it was the last place it would ever visit. The first of the pair arrived in November of 1980. It came within about 124,000 kilometers of the cloud tops. On the way in, it passed close under Titan, within a few thousand kilometers of the top of the Haze, and looked for the ground beneath it. It found none. The Haze went down as far as the cameras could see, and finishing that answer took another 25 years. That one pass took it out of the plane the planets sit in. The geometry of the Titan encounter bent its course upward and northward, away from every other planet, and it has been climbing out of the solar system ever since. It is the most distant human object there is, and Saturn is the last world it ever went near. The second arrived in August of 1981. It came in closer, about 41,000 kilometers above the cloud tops, and it spent most of its attention on the rings, watching a single star set slowly behind them through one instrument. It measured the ring structure down to a scale of 100 meters or so, and turned what had looked like a handful of broad bands into thousands of separate ringlets. Between them, those two passes settled most of what was known for a generation. They found the ringlets and the gaps with small moons sitting in them, and the faint markings that come and go on the widest ring, and several moons nobody had ever seen. They found the hexagon at the North Pole. They measured the day and the tilt and the temperature, and what the air is made of. Then they both went on. The second carried on to Uranus in 1986 and Neptune in 1989 and was bent southward on its way past. The first was already climbing north. Nothing came to Saturn again for 23 years, and through all of that time, the rings turned exactly as they had been turning, unwatched from anywhere close by. The machine that went back did not fly past. It stopped and stayed. It left here in October of 1997 and took almost 7 years to arrive. It reached Saturn on the 1st of July, 2004, and settled into orbit by burning for 96 minutes, with the rings passing overhead. It stayed for 13 years. In that time, it went around the planet 294 times and made 162 close passes of the moons, 127 of them at Titan alone. Almost everything in tonight's story came from that one machine. The seas on Titan and the maps of them. The plume at the south pole of Enceladus, found in its first year out there, and the layer of water underneath it. The walls standing up in the rings, caught in the flat light of the equinox. Several new moons. 13 unbroken years of the hexagon. Toward the end, there was fuel enough for one more thing. It was put onto a set of orbits that carried it between the planet and the inner edge of the rings, through a gap about 2,000 kilometers wide that nothing had ever crossed before. And it made that crossing 22 times, once every 6.5 days, across 5 months. Each pass gave a closer view of the cloud tops than anything before it, and a direct measure of how much material the rings actually hold. The last of those orbits did not come back out. On the 15th of September, 2017, it went into Saturn's atmosphere. That had been decided years in advance, and for a plain reason. It was nearly out of fuel, and nothing was to be left drifting that might one day come down on Enceladus or Titan and leave anything of ours behind. It sent readings the whole way in. It held its antenna pointed back at this planet while the atmosphere thickened around it, and reported on what the air it was passing through was made of. It carried on doing that until the atmosphere took it, having done everything it was built for, and rather more. Then it stopped. What it sent last took an hour and a half to cross the distance. So the last of them arrived on a September morning in a quiet room from a machine that had already been part of Saturn for an hour and a half by the time anybody here knew it. Nothing has been to Saturn since, and nothing is on the way. The rings are turning tonight regardless. 7 hours around on the inside and 14 on the outside, exactly as they turned through all 23 years when nobody was there, and as they were turning long before anybody here knew that they were there. Nothing out there is in any hurry. The ice goes round, piece by piece, each piece on its own path, the way it has gone round for longer than anybody can put a date to. The moons come back to where they started on time, one after another, whether or not anything is watching them. Nothing out there needs anything from anybody tonight. There is nothing to follow now, and nothing to wait for. Only the ice and the light lying on it, and the long, slow turn around. Sleep well